In the case of China, they definitely hold the largest amount of inventories out there, probably 300 to 400 million pounds of U3O8 equivalent. But based on their build out plans, they're looking to hit 150 gigawatts by 2030, and they're at 54 gigawatts. So they're looking at another 90 reactors built in the next, in the next 6.5 years. I mean, this is insane numbers. I don't think they're going to hit that level, but they're going for it. They just approved 6 construction starts last week alone. But assuming they hit 150 gigawatts by 2030, if we assume that they hit that mark, then we're talking about 75 million pounds of uranium demand every single year just in China. So those inventories are basically negligible. They're going to have to buy more uranium. They're going to have to secure more contracts. They're going to have to take over more projects internationally.
Think. Act. And prosper. You are now tuned into the Money Level Show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Money Level Show. This is your host, Daryl Thomas, and here we think, act, and prosper. We focus on changing financial trajectories and building legacies. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Justin Huhn. Justin Huhn is the founder and owner of Uranium Insider. He gets all the inside information as to what is happening in the uranium space as we are currently in the uranium bull market. Today, we get Justin's perspective on what is happening in the uranium space, what is happening in new developments around the world as the uranium story gets more attention on a global basis. So without further ado, please tune in to the interview with Justin Huhn. Hey, Justin, what's going on? You're growing the beard out, man. What's happening?
Oh, we've got a very strange kind of weather phenomenon. Usually when the summer hits, I shave my head and I keep my face shaved because it's just so hot. I don't like having all that hair, but it's about 70 degrees and pouring rain today in Southern California. So yeah, it started to cool down. I don't know. My wife likes the beard. The business world doesn't. So it's a constant battle,
Hey, me, I got 3 kids and married, so I'm like, you get what you get from me. So it's like,
there you go.
I got a, especially, I remember when I was a kid, they said, hey, don't shave, it gets worse. And then I disobeyed and didn't listen. And now it just grows back so fast. So it's hard to keep up.
I understand. Yeah, I definitely understand.
Another thing that's hard to keep up on is there's so many developments in the uranium space. And we, obviously appreciate you coming back on. I'm just going to share the chart of the spot price. It's looking nice. Like it's continuously moving up. And so this is on Y charts here. So I'm just looking at the 3-year chart, but it looks like it's steady. I mean, these were the times when, everyone got hyped and then got washed out a few times. But now, it looks like it's just steady trending up. So what are you seeing with the uranium spot price?
The uranium spot price is it's in a very, very clear bull market. Honestly, that's one element that really gives me a lot of conviction to just kind of hang on through the volatility is it's extremely obvious that the commodity itself is in a bull market. It hasn't gone up in a straight line from the bottom in 2016, but it's been trending up with higher highs and higher lows for the most part. So it's very, very constructive. And, on the pricing front for the commodity, one of the really interesting things is, one of the primary sort of bearish theses, I suppose, is this theory that a lot of held inventory will come into the market, flood into the market when the prices are higher and keep prices down. And that remains to be seen thus far in a recovery from $18 a pound to almost $60 a pound here. We've yet to see any evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, the opposite is true. Those certain entities that have historically been spot market sellers are currently spot market buyers. The trend is very, very clear of the, for the commodity itself for the past few years and in our opinion, for the coming few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and when they're talking about the inventory to my understanding, this is the inventory that was like been there, I think was mined back in like the 70s or something. Is that the same inventory you're talking about?
Well, there's various different sorts of inventories, but you can, and they generally speaking, exist across the fuel cycle. So when you say there's X amount of uranium inventory, typically that's a U3O8 equivalent number. So if you'll say, the average US utility has just under 2 years worth of inventory, well, typically that's 2 years worth of operating fuel, but in various different forms. So typically a utility will hold some U3O8, some UF6 at a conversion facility. They'll hold some EUP. They'll hold some fabricated fuel for their next core reload. So there's abundant inventory out there, right? There's probably more than 1 billion pounds of total U3O8 inventory, U3O8 equivalent inventory. But most of this is held by actual nuclear utilities. This is strategic nuclear fuel for the operation of their facilities. Some of this is strategically state-owned. In the case of China, they definitely hold the largest amount of inventories out there, probably 300 to 400 million pounds of U3O8 equivalent. But based on their build out plans, they're looking to hit 150 gigawatts by 2030, and they're at 54 gigawatts. So they're looking at another 90 reactors built in the next, in the next 6.5 years. I mean, this is insane numbers. I don't think they're going to hit that level, but they're going for it. They just approved 6 construction starts last week alone. But assuming they hit 150 gigawatts by 2030, if we assume that they hit that mark, then we're talking about, 75 million pounds of uranium demand every single year just in China. So those inventories are basically negligible. They're going to have to buy more uranium. They're going to have to secure more contracts. They're going to have to take over more projects internationally. And they're doing what they can to expand domestic mining. And there's not a whole lot they can do there because the mineral wealth in terms of uranium is not great in China.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's definitely bullish news. And we ain't just hyping up the crowd here. These are facts.
Sure.
My guy does his homework. So what does this look like for the United States? Where are we at currently with our uranium production or reactors and such? I know a while ago California was talking about shutting down the last one, and then I think they canceled that plan or whatnot. Where are we at with our own production and such? Hello, everyone. Sorry for the break in action, but I want to tell you about the link in my description below. This is to the New Orleans Investment Conference. This conference has been around for years and have brought many people out, such as Milton Friedman, Gerald Ford, Alan Greenspan, and Margaret Thatcher. This conference is put on by Brian Lundeen and his team. Brian is the CEO of Gold Newsletter. This year, they're going to have speakers such as Jim Rickards, George Gammon, Peter Schiff, Rick Rule, Danielle DiMartino Booth, Lynn Alden, and many others. Now, I encourage you to click the link in the description below. You can choose to attend the live event, which I will likely be at, as well as the event that is live streamed. You can support the channel by using my link below, so I encourage you to check that out. Now, let's get back to the interview.
Well, uranium production in the United States and let's say support for nuclear in the United States are two pretty different situations. Uranium production in the United States is almost zero, while we consume about 45 million pounds of uranium every single year, and we're producing basically none of it. There's multiple companies that are, it's crazy, that are moving towards production. The only company that is producing anything whatsoever, I believe, is UR Energy. They produced, I think, less than 100,000 pounds last year or something like that. But UR Energy, Energy Fuels, Encore Energy, UEC, Peninsula, I'm probably missing one or two others, but they're all kind of moving towards producing. And I think within a few years, we'll probably be maybe around that 5 million pounds a year kind of mark in terms of uranium production. But there is a lot of support coming from the federal government, specifically the Department of Energy, for supporting the fuel cycle. They primarily look to be supporting enrichment, but in their support of enrichment by issuing requests for proposal out into the market, that the Department of Energy is going to be a buyer of not only low enriched uranium, like what typically goes into a large, light water reactor, but also high assay low enriched uranium, also known as HALEU, which is enriched up to almost 20% U-235, and that's the fuel that goes hypothetically into advanced reactors. These are different designs. These are not light water, boiling water reactors. These are, gas cooled, high temperature reactors, fast reactors. And so there's the support is there from the DOE. There's also quite a bit of funding from the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed last year for clean energy production and clean energy investment tax credits that's supporting the existing fleet to a pretty large extent. Something that we saw just last week, which I think is really interesting and possibly telling, is that the Palisades reactor in Michigan that was shut down in 2022, that the new budget for 2024 that was signed by the governor of Michigan allocated $150 million to restart this reactor that was shut down. This has never happened in the United States. So there's a very clear, really, really incredible sea change in terms of sentiment and appreciation for nuclear that's happening kind of on a global scale. In the United States, it's looking positive. Now, with one caveat, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, still has yet to approve any new builds after the Vogtle plant, which was just started up in the recent months, and recently over the past couple of weeks hit first commercial electricity production. That was a very long project, very expensive. But the NRC is kind of that question mark in terms of new nuclear in the United States. I think we'll get there. I'm positive. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic about building new nuclear here. But at the very least, we've got immense support from the DOE, not only for the existing fleet, but also for these demonstration advanced reactor projects. That's also getting funding, over $1 billion of funding for TerraPower's Natrium reactor, X Energy's XE100. These are the two demonstration projects with DOE funding. So good. It's all moving in the right direction. There's still a question mark about the NRC and future new nuclear, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah. So, it sounds even more bullish in my opinion. Because of the demand for it. And obviously supply and demand economics, but then on top of that, like, globalization seems to be slowing down. We had the formation of the BRICS nations, and it seems like the world is becoming more polarized. So many countries are trying to focus on their own energy production and innovation. And so are you seeing anything with, as far as, like, obviously the BRICS has been a big topic that's in the news, but how many of those countries control, like, a lot of the energy market or the uranium market?
Well, it's the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and there's been recent applications, if I recall correctly, from Argentina and Iran, and potentially some other countries as well. Brazil has a decent reserve of uranium. They produce a little bit of uranium. They're more consumers of uranium than producers, if I recall correctly. India doesn't produce a lot of uranium, but they have a pretty aggressive nuclear build out, so they're net buyers. Russia is the biggest player, and China, of course. China has a very large mine, the Husab mine in Namibia. They've got the Rossing mine also in Namibia. They have a stake in Langer Heinrich, in Paladin's Langer Heinrich in Namibia. And they're looking at, and they have a bunch of JVs in Kazakhstan. So the entities that are mostly involved in Kazakhstan, in terms of, we're talking U308, so that would be the Chinese, the Japanese have a couple of JVs, the French have a JV, but it's primarily Russia. Russia and China have the most joint ventures with Kazatomprom. So a lot of the uranium coming out of Kazakhstan, which is over 40% of global production out of this one country, more than half of that, vastly more than half of that, is going to end up in Russia or China. Now, when you're talking about the fuel cycle, Russia, of course, is the biggest player in terms of conversion and enrichment. And that's really what has shaken up the global nuclear fuels market over the past 18 months with, as you mentioned, kind of a bifurcated market, a multipolar world. This is looking like it's sticking. For how long, I don't know, but it looks like it has legs. I don't think, even if this Ukraine invasion finds a peaceful resolution, let's say tomorrow, which would be awesome for everybody involved in that terrible situation. But I kind of feel like it's unlikely that all of a sudden we're going to just kind of revert back to how things were 2 years ago. So with all of that said, there's challenges in the fuel cycle for the West, the various nuclear utilities in the various Western countries that are doing what they can to avoid new business with Russia. There's challenges in terms of conversion and enrichment, and that's why we've seen the prices skyrocket for those two services. And in the meantime, the enrichers have to raise tails assays to produce enough for the demand that they're seeing, and that means more uranium purchased on the front end. We're just starting to see the very early innings of probably a multi-year contracting cycle that's going to be driven by Western nuclear utilities that are less covered than the Eastern, and are having to buy uranium to feed into these higher assay enrichment contracts. So it's the demand side is looking very, very strong. The supply side is in question.
Okay. Yep. And so the contracting cycle, what is it looking like there in terms of, I know that many contracts were expiring and they had to renew these contracts at higher uranium spot prices and such. Like what are we looking at? What are we looking like in that arena?
So year to date, we've got 118 million pounds officially signed into long-term contracts. And as you mentioned, legacy contracts are always rolling off. This is not unique point in time in terms of that. You have contracts signed 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, and those are being delivered into by producers. And one important point to understand about not only its implications for a slightly delayed start to the contracting cycle, which is what we've seen, but also a change in the new contracts versus how the old contracts were signed, largely, generally speaking. And so one element of long-term contracts, typically, especially when it's a buyer's market, especially when there's not really any supply concerns on the horizon, is producers will actually offer flex options to utilities, to the buyers, which means that a buyer can flex in a couple of different ways, in a couple of different directions. So let's say they have a certain amount of uranium to be delivered a few years out. They can flex up that contract and actually receive sometimes as much as 20% more uranium was signed in that initial contract. They can accelerate the delivery. They can also flex contracts down and say, oh, I actually don't need quite that much, or you can deliver it later. Now, what's happened is because we've been in such an obvious and clear and consistent uptrend in price, that utilities, rather than going out and buying pounds that they might need in the short-term spot market and paying up for it, or signing long-term contracts with Cameco or Orano or Kazatomprom or BHP, whoever it might be, rather than signing those long-term contracts at, $65 fixed for a developer, and maybe they get market reference with like an $80 ceiling, they're going to flex up a contract they signed 4 years ago that's maybe majority fixed at $35. So they're going to get as much as they can out of those legacy contracts before they step in and secure their needs going out towards the later part of the decade. That's what we've been seeing, a lot of flexing up of these contracts. And that does two things. It delays their need to come into the market for new contracts, and it tightens the short and mid-term market, because those are pounds that the producer didn't necessarily have allocated to fill into that flexed up delivery, but it's certainly taking some production out of availability for the spot market and, let's say, the short to mid-term market. So it tightens the market in real time, in the present moment, and for the next couple of years, and it delays that moment where they need to come to the table. But that delay, of course, is relatively short-lived, and by the time any utility that flexed up a legacy contract does step into the market, maybe it's 6 months or 12 months down the road, we're going to be at even higher prices at that point too. So it's a temporary band-aid for a utility that has to cover, late 2020s, early 2030s. They're going to be buying, and they're going to be buying very soon. They're going to be buying more uranium because of the higher tails assays in the enrichment contracts. It's this funnel. It's all coming down to the uranium point at the bottom of the funnel. And that's where we're at right now. And it's literally just starting.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing to hear. So I'm just looking at all these countries that you tweeted out, and you all, if you aren't following Justin on Twitter or X, I'm saying X,
right?
That's X. It reminds me of DMX. So be sure to follow him at Uranium Insider. So you tweeted a couple of days ago, all the countries looking to implement / expand nuclear I'm just going to read off the list. You have the UK, Poland, France, Netherlands, United States, Canada, Estonia, Finland, Czechia, however you say that. I don't
I
know. I
think it's
butchered that.
pronounced Czechia, but I'm famous for butchering
I butchered it.
names
Sorry.
in foreign
Sorry if
countries.
somebody from Czechia is viewing. I'm sorry. Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Romania, Sweden, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, the UAE, this Turkey.
Yeah, Turkey. It's kind of a rebrand.
Oh, okay. That's the rebrand. Oh, got you. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, China, South Africa, Ghana, and India. Now, out of all these countries, which one was the most surprising to you to see? Like, oh, they're looking at nuclear too.
Okay, so by far the most surprising that I've heard, which in this news, like this just came across my desk yesterday, is Uganda is talking with the South Koreans and the Russians to build 15.6 gigawatts of nuclear. And that's astonishing to me. So
Wow.
I don't really know what the strategy is here. It's looking like they're trying to split it between multiple Russian design VVER reactors and multiple South Korean design APR, like large reactors. This is like a dozen large reactors in a country that doesn't have any nuclear whatsoever. So they're looking at going from none to having an enormous amount of electricity. And I don't really know what the strategy is here, because I don't know how it's going to be funded. I don't know if it's part of Russia is probably going to have an export part of this deal, right? So they'll build a reactor, they'll train the reactor operators, they'll provide the fuel, they'll deal with the waste, and eventually the decommissioning. That's part of this export package. And Rosatom has a massive export book. But this was not only surprising because it looks like this is vastly more energy than the country is currently utilizing. Of course, they've got Kenya right next door, and perhaps they can export energy to Nairobi. And I think there's a decent sized population in Uganda, but this is and there's multiple countries in Africa. Uganda, Ghana is looking at nuclear. Egypt is currently building nuclear. I'm sure South Africa, I think, is looking at expanding nuclear, which they've had a terrible time in terms of energy politics lately. So that's the most surprising to me is wow, going from 0 to 15 gigawatts. I mean, that's just like
0 to 100, huh?
Yeah.
That's amazing though, because that's what part of the ethical piece of like uranium and nuclear energy is providing sufficient amounts of energy to nations who don't have 24 hours a day. And so that's exciting news. And and plus, Africa, since I don't know if you know this, but Africa was big, very, they were a major world player in the days of like Mansa Musa and such. And this was when like Europe was going through like the plagues and everything, and they went through their dark times. Africa was very huge during that time, and they've been struggling since. And so just to see the energy, this sentiment around the energy of nuclear, which is very far efficient, clean, and abundant, it seems like this is a great deal for them.
100%. Yeah, there's a very, very clear correlation between energy abundance and GDP. So it's extremely exciting to think of what even building a few nuclear power plants in a country like Uganda, what it could do for the people and for the wealth of the country. And I absolutely applaud it. But it was what was surprising to me was for a country to go from 0 to such a huge, like calling the shot in a big way, like 15 gigawatts nuclear out of nowhere. So I don't really know what that's about, and whether there's plans for massive energy exports and how they're going to collaborate on the funding. I'm not exactly sure, but hey, I'm behind it. It's super cool.
That must have been one of those conversations with someone who's just super like educated in the space, and like, and then you're just mind blown by the thesis and everything. And then you're just like, I'm going all in, like.
Totally. And the South Koreans and the Russians they're eating everybody's lunch in terms of nuclear. I mean, the South Koreans they're absolutely crushing it. They just built the 4 reactors at Baraka in the UAE, and they're already talking about building number 5 and number 6. And this was done on time, on budget. Just just absolutely fantastic success story for the building of nuclear. And so to see that they're in discussion with South Korea and with Russia means they must be serious about it. So very cool.
So what's so like recently, you know, as you know, we're getting ready to wrap up, but recently I saw on the news headlines, it was with Niger and France, and I think they were providing uranium to some different nations. What was happening there, and like where are we at with that?
It's hard to say. Basically, there was a military coup in Niger, and Niger has been a very long time producing uranium producing country. It's the second poorest country in the world. I mean, behind Haiti. Just extreme poverty in this country, and the French have been there for a very long time. It's essentially, you know, one of the French colonies, really, and it's looking like the military that did undertake this coup seems to be wanting to drive the French out. It's very difficult to try to get accurate information about what's going on there without actually physically being there. But it looks like Nigeria, which borders Niger and is the largest country in the ECOWAS collective, has cut off electricity to Niger, and they provide about 70% of the electricity to Niger. There's a couple of sanctions that have been imposed by the bordering countries in the ECOWAS collective. It looks pretty messy. So far, from what we can tell, there hasn't been any actual fighting between the Nigerian military and ECOWAS or with France or whatever. I think that they're trying to work things out diplomatically. At least that's what the military junta that's in control now is stating, is they want to get as quickly as possible again to a democratic election. How soon that happens, I don't know. What it means for the future of uranium in the country, I don't know. There have been 5 coups in Niger since their independence, and that has never interrupted uranium production in the country. But it seems like, generally speaking, the sentiment amongst Nigerians towards the French is not all that great in this present moment. So, you know, who knows how this ends up playing out. I don't know how necessary it is for the French to remain a presence there. It's important for them in terms of uranium. They get about 5 million pounds a year out of Niger. I don't think it's not really make or break for the French. They have deposits and production all over the world, really. But still, it's the location of the most near-term greenfield development project, which is Global Atomics DASA. There's expected production from this mine 2 years from now. So anything that happens there that delays that, it's just yet another, a piece of evidence that supply is in question. Supply is absolutely in question. Very rarely do you have guaranteed supply. In this scenario, of course, not just in Niger, but with interruptions that we've had from COVID and from Kazakhstan with their ties with Russia and having supply chain problems with sulfuric acid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We were coming out of a decade of absolute abundant cheap supply, and that ship has slowly done a 180, and now supply is tight. Expected production in a couple of years is now in question. The supply side is just it's hard to hang your hat on it, and the demand side just continues to be de-risked almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, wow. That's interesting, because I know France. There's always these comparisons between France and Germany in terms of like nuclear energy usage, because I believe the French, right, they're very pro-nuclear. And so it'll be interesting to see what develops out of that. Well, Justin, thank you for coming on. Where can people find more about you?
My pleasure. Right up here, uraniuminsider.com. That's where you can find us. I'm also on Twitter or X, you said it.
I gotta put like a little chime sound when you point it there. Like,
ding.
Yeah, I gotta do that.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
Yeah, you as well, Daryl.